The figures appear grim. It is estimated that between 30 and 40% of the homeless population suffer from mental illness. Only 50% of individuals with schizophrenia take their prescribed medication. In prisons today, approximately 10 to 15% of inmates are severely mentally ill. But other figures point toward more optimistic outcomes. For example, with family education and support, rehospitalization of individuals with severe mental illness is reduced by 75%. These figures bring up many questions. How are individuals with schizophrenia and other severe mental illnesses faring in our communities? And what measures are now being implemented to help them? In this program, we hope to provide you with a few answers. I'm your host, Robin Crawford. I'd like to begin with a short historical overview of the treatment of people with severe psychiatric illnesses such as schizophrenia. 200 years ago in the United States, they were locked away and forgotten in jails, almshouses, and state mental hospitals. In the 1840s and 50s, Dorothea Dix, a mental health advocate and reformer, reported to state legislatures on the abominable treatment.
I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the state of insane persons confined within this Commonwealth in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience.
Dix and other reformers fought for the building of public psychiatric hospitals, which would provide humane treatment. But through the years, the care provided was mixed. Good in some, so-so in others, and some were snake pits. In the 1950s came psychotropic drugs which controlled symptoms enough that patients could function at a much higher level, including in the community. In the early 60s, care shifted from public psychiatric hospitals to the community. This was prompted by recommendations from the Joint Commission on Mental Illness and Health and strongly supported by congressional legislation and President John F. Kennedy.
If we launch a broad new health program now, it will be possible within a decade to reduce the number of patients now under custodial care by up to 50%.
Also, a financial incentive for states to empty state-financed hospitals was created by new rules which enabled individuals with mental illness who lived in the community to receive a variety of federal benefits. The process of emptying the hospitals, called deinstitutionalization, resulted in hundreds of thousands of patients being discharged into the community. The intent was that they would receive care, treatment, and follow-up services in community mental health centers. This failed for a variety of reasons, and today we have an uncoordinated, fragmented effort with most individuals with mental illness living isolated lives of quiet desperation, and thousands of others living in conditions little better than in the time of Dorothea Dix. Although today most individuals with schizophrenia live with families or in board and care facilities, a significant minority bounce from facility to facility. The scenario goes like this. A person is released with inadequate aftercare planning from a psychiatric hospital to home, lands in jail, is released to a homeless shelter, goes back to jail, is released to a board and care, doesn't do well, is readmitted to the hospital, and on and on and on. Psychiatrist John Talbot refers to this as transinstitutionalization, in which chronically mentally ill people have been shifted from a single lousy institution to multiple wretched ones. Many remain on the streets. As mentioned before, it is estimated that between 30 and 40% of the homeless suffer from mental illness. This isn't to say that individuals with mental illness can't live in the community. The majority can. But to do so, they need appropriate continuing care, medication for symptom management, safe housing, maintenance of income, transportation, and psychosocial rehabilitation. It's the coordination and funding of this care that is missing today in most communities. Let's begin by discussing problems some individuals with untreated schizophrenia have that make it difficult for them to access care in the community. Liz Davis, whose son has schizophrenia, discusses an important factor: stigma.
There's a lot of stigma associated with this illness. When you're off your medication, everyone knows there's something the matter with you. And there are a lot of reasons for the stigma. First, people don't understand, and then most of the mentally ill people are rather unattractive. They're not well groomed. They're usually overweight. So stigma is going to be so difficult for us to overcome. We're working on it, and I think education is probably the most important thing that we can do for this.
Gail Green is an outreach worker who has herself experienced the symptoms of schizophrenia. She discusses her situation before receiving adequate treatment.
I was homeless. I was so scared. I was so paranoid. I didn't panhandle. I didn't trust anybody. I ate out of trash cans. I slept in dumpsters. I slept in parks, abandoned houses. I think I almost died because I got pneumonia once because they stole my shoes. That's how I ended up in the hospital. And the guy ended up in the state hospital. And but that didn't happen. I would probably have been gone by now.
Families, too, are greatly impacted. Their needs in terms of emotional support and education are extensive. Jean Sanchez, an advocate for individuals who are mentally ill and mother of a son with schizophrenia, discusses her son's illness and her family's initial reaction to it.
He heard voices, although we didn't know that that was what his distraction was at the time. I think for him, and I think from those that I observed, the biggest emotional fear that accompanies schizophrenia is fear, just fear. Our reaction finally was just terror on our part, not knowing what was wrong. Finally, when he was diagnosed, it was just pure grief. I cried a lot, in the shower mostly, so that it wouldn't disturb anyone else in the family. I did as much reading as I could about what schizophrenia was supposed to be, and then I thought if only we could get him into the hospital, that would be fixed just like tonsillitis was fixed and just like a broken bone was fixed, and if we could just get him in the hospital, which of course he would not go to because they are into denial. And they almost all feel that there is nothing wrong, and so they don't need to go to the hospital. And when they're 6'1" and 190 pounds, you don't pick them up and take them to the hospital. You have to try and work with them.
As Jean Sanchez soon learned, the schizophrenia could not be fixed or cured by hospitalization. But hospitalization can help stabilize a person who is acutely psychotic. Gail Green and Jean Sanchez also point out factors such as fear and the inability to recognize that anything's wrong that prevent some individuals with mental illness from seeking or accepting help. At the present time, because of strict state statutes, it's extremely difficult for families to have an adult family member committed to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Bill Davis, former president of the California Alliance for the Mentally Ill and a father of a son with schizophrenia, discusses this.
Well, we have found that there's a real problem when our son becomes decompensated and needs hospitalization, needs the treatment that a psychiatrist can afford him and the medication. We found that there's a real problem getting him into the system against his will. We can all hark back to the old story of this couple is going to put their mother-in-law in the asylum so they can get her money. And as you know, the old pendulum will swing too far the other way to compensate for these rare situations. And it's gone far too much the other way, so that now there's a lot of innocent victims out there, and I'm speaking about the mentally ill, that should be given support with regard to medication and psychiatrists' help. And that's why today there are so many people in the jails that are mentally ill, is because these people are not committed when they should be, for the very reason, not that the outreach teams, the nurses and the psych techs don't want to commit them, but they're tied by the letter of these laws. And the laws really should be changed to make it a little bit more lenient.
One study of cases of arrest found that in half the cases, a failed attempt at commitment to a hospital had preceded the arrest. Therefore, another problem that has emerged since the deinstitutionalization movement is the criminalization of persons who are mentally ill. Dr. Gene Koonsman, Medical Director of Forensic Services at the Los Angeles County Jail, discusses his impressions.
One of the things that I have found, and almost all of my co-workers here in the jail have found, because most of us have worked elsewhere, either in hospitals or in the community, the inmates that we see in jail are the same people that we used to treat in the private or the county psychiatric hospitals and in the county clinics. The only difference between the folks that are here in the jail and the folks we treat in the clinic is the folks here in the jail got arrested. They're the very same people. And I can give you stories about seeing people in the clinic and losing them for 60 days or 90 days, and they come and tell me they were on a vacation. And when I got here to the jail, I found out that 60 days and 90 days often turned out to be the term of a sentence. And their vacation was the Los Angeles County Jail. For those folks who are interested in community mental health, I believe, at least at the current time, community mental health has come to the jail.
Recognizing that many individuals with mental illness had repeated contacts with the criminal justice system and were charged with low-grade misdemeanors such as vandalism, trespassing, and malicious mischief, Detective Walt DeCoeur of the Los Angeles Police Department began to research alternatives to incarceration.
And when I first started to identify this and realize what was happening, my first thought was, well, we're law enforcement, and that's what we're supposed to do, arrest for crimes. But after I started to delve more closely, I found that the criminalization of this population, if you will, wasn't because of the fact that we arrest for all crimes and nothing else, but because the problem here was that officers in the field were not being provided meaningful resources and to have some alternative to arrest. So if there was a crime involved, rather than release this person onto the street where they can harm themselves or someone else, they were taken in on for the crime. And what happens usually is that person is OR'd, released on their own recognizance, back to the street, cited back to court. Well, this person's mentally ill and probably doesn't show up. So a warrant is issued, they're rearrested, put back into the system, and ultimately they're released again and not really dealt with in an effective manner to address that particular issue. And you've tied up the criminal justice system 2-3 times dealing with this person.
As a result of DeCoeur's findings, a specialized mental evaluation unit was devised. He comments.
Because you can't train 8,000 officers to understand the complexities of the mental health law and all related statutes. But you can train a key unit to understand and have an intimate knowledge of not only the criminal justice system, but also the mental health system as it applies. What our department does and what each officer is mandated to do is anytime they have probable cause to believe that someone may be mentally ill, developmentally disabled, or some type of behavior that is unusual, they shall call the mental evaluation unit, and that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The mental evaluation unit is charged with providing them advice and expertise on what to do.
In addition, the mental evaluation unit has the authority to dispatch a team consisting of an officer and a mental health professional to provide additional assistance to the officer at the site should it be needed.
For the first time, we were able to combine the resources and expertise of the criminal justice system and the mental health system into one team and brocading those services into one meaningful response where both team members share equally the information that each system has to offer.
In some cities, then, meaningful responses are being devised to assist those with mental illness and help them avoid incarceration or sometimes even needless hospitalization.
Let me just say this one thing. Law enforcement got into this, if you will, by default. The American Bar Association, in its criminal justice mental health standards, for instance, says that law enforcement's job in dealing with the mentally ill is one of transportation only. But obviously, we have to do much more than that because there is no other meaningful resource.
Although some cities, such as Los Angeles, are taking measures to provide alternatives to incarceration, the arrest rate of individuals who are mentally ill is still very high.
In the early 1980s, in Los Angeles County, some studies were done that demonstrated that upwards of 15% of the inmate population in the Los Angeles County jails was in the need of psychiatric services with either severe or major mental health diagnoses. Over the years, in my opinion, that this is a number that has increased dramatically. I have been in the trenches of the jail and have seen the inmates at their cell side and wandered through many parts of the jail. I believe the number is at least in the neighborhood of 25%, and at times maybe it's really closer to 30%.
I've also found that in other areas across the country, many correctional officers are undertrained to deal with the person who is mentally ill. Most receive either no training whatsoever or less than 3 hours. Bill Davis describes what happened when his son was incarcerated.
The jailers and the officers in those jails, they don't understand mental health systems, and they don't understand people that are mentally ill. So if your kid starts to act out, generally what happens is he gets beat up. And I'm not laying an unfair trip on the officers, but it's just the fact that they probably look at him like they would anybody else and figure that this kid is just giving him a bad time for the sake of doing so.
I think we can see that incarceration is a misuse of facilities that are already overcrowded and not designed for individuals with mental illness. But many wonder about community finances.
Oftentimes the community looks at the statistics and says, gee, it's cheaper to treat these people in jail because it costs less per day than, say, a hospital, a county hospital, state hospital. What they fail to realize is that what they're getting in jail usually is just custodial care and medication for those who are in the need of medication. Obviously not everybody is going to take medication, and medication may not be indicated for all individuals in jail. But to believe that we are doing any kind of significant change in learning or behavioral patterns, for the most part, certainly in a short-term setting as the jail usually is not true.
Another serious problem facing the inmate with mental illness is lack of aftercare.
Up until recently, the major emphasis in most custodial settings has been to treat the individual while they're in the custodial setting, and when they leave the custodial setting, not to worry about where they go to. More recently, and particularly here in LA County, we have a considerable effort towards trying to hook these folks up with resources on the outside. In complicating the issue at this point, though, is the fact that the individual has been arrested and does have a, quote, record and is considered to be a dangerous felon or some other misinterpretation oftentimes. The mental health resources that are available oftentimes are resistant or tend to be resistant to providing services for those who come out of jail situations.
Now I'd like to change focus here a bit and talk about some possible solutions. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. via telephone is author, clinical and research psychiatrist E. Fuller Torrey. Dr. Torrey, what would you say is the single most important factor that individuals with schizophrenia need in order to function and thrive in the community?
The single most important thing for someone who is living in the community and who has schizophrenia is to continue on medication and to get the proper medication. Without the medication, there's very few people with schizophrenia who can do very much of anything. So that until and unless the medication issue is settled, then all of the other things are much more difficult to carry out.
What effects do the drugs have on the disease? I mean, do they cure it?
Robin, the medications we have don't cure schizophrenia. What they do is they control at least some of the symptoms in the majority of cases. Very much like diabetes. Insulin does not cure diabetes. Insulin controls the symptoms that come about because of the malfunctioning of the pancreas. In the same way, the drugs that we use in schizophrenia control the chemicals in the brain that are causing the symptoms, so that most people with schizophrenia get at least some relief using the medications we have, and some people get almost complete relief. It varies, of course, a great deal from case to case.
Does everyone respond to the medication?
No, everyone doesn't respond to the medication, unfortunately. There's probably 10 to 15% of people with schizophrenia who respond to almost none of the medications that we have. We call these people treatment resistant. There is another 10 to 15% who respond, but for whom the side effects of the medication are so severe and uncomfortable that the medications can't be used or can't be used in the dose which they really would help. That leaves at least two-thirds, between two-thirds and three-quarters of people with this disease will get significant improvement of their symptoms if they use the medication.
But are these medications addictive? Do they produce a high?
No, the antipsychotic drugs don't produce a high, and they're not addictive. You don't need more and more of them to produce the same effect.
What about some of the new drugs that are out? I've heard that there are some that are very effective.
There are several new drugs that either have come on the market or are coming on the market to treat schizophrenia. Clozapine is the one that has been most highly talked about, and that appears to be a very useful drug because it is effective in about one-third of the cases that don't respond to any other drugs. Risperidone is another new drug that's now on the market and looks modestly promising, although it's not as good as a drug like clozapine. There are several others that probably will be approved within the next year or two. Olanzapine is one that looks especially promising, and there are another half dozen that are in the pipeline. So we can certainly expect to see some improvements in the drugs that we have over the next couple of years.
I've seen the figure that only about 50% of individuals with schizophrenia take their prescribed medication. Now, since they're so effective, why don't more take them?
Well, the reason, Robin, why many people don't take their medication is because about half the people with schizophrenia don't realize they're sick. They don't have what we call insight, and there are now two good studies done on this in recent years supporting this. So if a person does not have insight, does not believe that they're sick, then they don't take their medicine because they don't think they need it. That's why we need some mechanism to make people take their medicine, those people who do respond to the medicine and who won't take it otherwise.
What measures can communities take for individuals who need to be on medication but refuse to take it?
There are several mechanisms that can be used to make sure people take the medication. One which is available in 38 states is called outpatient commitment. And what that says is, for example, in the District of Columbia, I go down to court and I ask the judge, I say, I want to release this patient. He's already been in the hospital 21 times and he doesn't take his medicine when he leaves the hospital, so that the condition of his release is that he comes back and gets his injection, for example, every 2 weeks. And if he does not come back and get his medicine, I have the legal right to have him brought back to the hospital involuntarily. That is an outpatient commitment. In other words, the person can live in the community, but the condition is that they have to take the medication.
Dr. Torrey, I have another question for you. Now, for years I've heard that mentally ill individuals are no more dangerous than the population at large. Is this true?
We have, Robin, we have recent studies now that clearly show that there is a subgroup of people with serious mental illnesses who are more dangerous than the general population. And so what we have been saying for a number of years actually is not true. Now, the group that are more dangerous are a small group. They are almost always people who are not taking the medication, and they're often people who are also abusing drugs and alcohol at the same time. So that these people are identifiable, and we can predict with a reasonable level of certainty who is more likely to be dangerous. And these are the ones that we really have to insist stay on their medication, because when they don't stay on their medication, they may become dangerous.
Thank you very much, Dr. Torrey, for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure also, Robin.
I'd like now to focus on some other aspects of life for those who have schizophrenia. Jean Sanchez, who has become active on behalf of individuals with mental illness as a result of her son's illness, discusses some of these aspects.
Independent living skills as one of our outcomes for the individual who has a mental illness is extremely important. Many of them have been incarcerated, or they've been in hospitals for a long period of time, and they've gotten out of the habit of being responsible for their own lives. And it's very important that they learn to bathe themselves, to their grooming be acceptable to society, that they're able to take care of their own living arrangement, that they can get to appointments on time, that they can take public transportation, that they can be responsible for their social life and reach out to friends and places to go, just like we all need. And those are the kinds of things we're talking about that we need for a normal life. And when we talk about vocational rehabilitation, we might be talking about volunteer work, we might be talking about working 2 hours a week, we might be talking about 20 hours a week or more. But the idea, of course, is that then when people ask you, what do? They can actually say what kind of productive thing they do, and that makes us all feel better.
I'd like to make an analogy here between the needs of a person with a physical disability such as a spinal cord injury and a person with schizophrenia. In general, the person who is paralyzed has a permanent disability, but can, with help such as wheelchairs and ramps, compensate and function at a higher level. The same is true for a person with schizophrenia. There's a permanent disability with reduced ability to problem solve, socialize, and cope with a stressful environment. With help, however, this person too can compensate and function at a higher level. There's a facility in Long Beach, California called The Village, which provides this kind of help. Bruce McKinley, a case manager at The Village, describes an important function, reaching out to individuals in the community.
If we do not go out and offer something to people on the street that are in desperate, despicable situations, if we can't offer them something better, they're not going to come in. They're going to remain out there. It may be misguided, their judgment may be clouded, it may be fear, anxiety, all of the things, but unless you can offer them something, they won't come in. And it starts at the level that they need, wherever that level is. We do not decide this person will need this or that. Our first question very often is, what can we do for you? And it's a specific question. We don't talk philosophy, we don't talk medicine, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I want to know what I specifically can do for that individual today, right now. Interestingly enough, your initial contact with people on the street, their response when you ask them, what can I do for you, is usually nothing. I don't want anything, I don't need anything, I have everything I need. With the mentally ill person, you accept that. And you may take a lunch with them. They may accept something like that just as a handout, a gift. Then you go back again. At some point in observation of the individual, you'll get a clue or a hook. And once you get one little bit of trust, or that you're okay, meaning the caseworker's okay, then you have the first inroad, and then you begin to hear little truths as to what they really need. And what some receive income, some have income, and they're still on the street. And you try and convince them that you can reconnect them with that income. You can reconnect them safely with a family that they don't trust. All of those things are at some time or another requested. But you start with real basics.
Gail Green, whom we've already met when she described her life as a homeless person, discusses her job as an outreach worker.
I have an 18-speed mountain bike, and I have a little cooler on the back where I keep lunches in. Different people who I talk to, not one person is the same. Some people who will want to talk to you right away, and there's some people who will be very drawn and don't want to have anything to do with you. But some people will take lunches from me, and some will not. Sometimes it can take up to a year or longer, or less shorter time than that to build trust with somebody, to finally to get them in. You just got to treat people like an individual. You can't treat them like condescending, which you got to treat them like, respect. If I'm going to their area, this is where they live. I ask permission, can I come in and talk with them? And we talk about everything, we don't talk about the illness. Casually, I mention where I'm from. Because to a homeless person, you rush out to that, tell where you're from, give you the card and all this, you're going to scare the person away. They want nothing to do with you. Treating a person who has been not like a kid, or they can never do something, like a normal person. It's a disease. It's like having diabetes or cancer. As long as we take our medication, we're fine. Just treat us with respect. To me, this is not work. This, to me, is like, it's like something, something I'm giving back to people. Over the years, the people who have helped me, it's something like I'm giving back to the community or to my family. I've got myself from low functioning to high functioning, and I guess I am an role model, but not just me. There's other people out there who are mentally ill, who are now raising themselves up. There's more out there. There's people going to school. There's people working in INS, who are going back in the workforce. So not just me. There's a lot more out there. Be surprised.
Instead of sending clients out to various agencies and doctors and schools and facilities, we try to keep in a central, integrated community all of the things, the primary needs that a psychiatric patient would need. They are not patients in the village. They are members. The organization is member-driven. At all levels, there are members on staff. Members participate in all decision-making.
Karen Strand, a registered nurse and director of training at the village, agrees.
In the traditional system, very often we see that people get lost in the cracks. They come to a psych emergency room, are stabilized for a few days, given a prescription for medications and an appointment to go to a clinic. They may or may not make it through the system of getting their meds and getting to that needed support and help. At the village, we provide that connection. We really have single point of accountability where staff are working with our members, our clients, we call members, through all of those different resources and needs. We use the basic principles of psychosocial rehabilitation. That means we're really looking at people in terms of what are their strengths and their abilities and their talents, not their disabilities. We don't focus on symptoms and illness. We focus on what people can do, what they want to do. We look at a variety of areas that include risk-taking, helping people to cope with stress, not avoid it. We encourage people to get out there and get jobs. We help people meet goals for education, getting back into school, looking at relationships. It's the basic things that everybody needs. Somebody to call when they're in trouble, some place to have productive work and to earn money, and that support system that we offer here in a very different way from the traditional setting. A lot of the work that we do focuses around what might be considered rather mundane things, but aren't. We are helping people to learn how to take a bus. We're working with them and standing in line in Social Security to try to get their entitlements. We're assisting them in very practical, real ways, walking side by side with them in the community, not just talking about things in an office and telling people what it is that they should be doing. We're doing it with them. An important element in the service that we provide is continuity. We work with members in whatever setting they may be. We're providing a sense of continuity because we're with them over a long period of time. For most of our members now, it's been 4+ years that we are providing that one person that they can come to whatever their need is. And wherever that need may be, we're following.
The village is an excellent example of what can be done in terms of outreach and in meeting the needs of individuals in the community. But the families of individuals with schizophrenia are also in need of assistance. Usually, they experience tremendous stress because of the person's unpredictability. They've concerns about his or her mental state and symptoms and fear what lies ahead. Many are isolated, lonely, and overwhelmed.
When he's not taking his medication, our son is very difficult to live with. His behavior is really unpredictable and his sleep patterns are very erratic. He gets up in the middle of the night, goes into the kitchen to make himself some food, makes a big mess, which is always left. He plays his music really, really loud, and this disturbs our sleep, plus the neighbors all around us. We get up and tell him to quiet things down, and he does for a little while, and then it's as if he forgets and he starts it up again. But that isn't as bad as when he leaves the house in the middle of the night, and you worry so much about where he's going, what is he doing. Each time you hear a siren, you think, is that the ambulance? Are we going to get a call from the hospital? Is that the police? Are we going to get a call from the police? And it is not easy living with him when he's off his medication.
And why don't we have a seat?
Oh, that'd be great. Well, I was really glad when you called our agency. What I'd like to begin with is just trying to get some feedback from you about the types of things that you're dealing with in terms of your daughter's behavioral changes.
Programs that help parents cope more effectively not only have a positive influence on the family members, but also on the mentally ill individual. With family education and support, rehospitalization is decreased by 75% and community functioning generally improves. The educational needs of families vary. Some need basic knowledge about the disorder itself, such as how to recognize signs of a relapse and how to manage the day-to-day problems. Others need only the most recent information about the disease and its treatment. Bill Davis discusses the Alliance for the Mentally Ill and some of the benefits it provides.
The Alliance for the Mentally Ill is a real important organization with regard to helping people like my wife and I, especially in the early stages. Most people we find that we've come across when we're working with AMI in the early stages of the illness for their son or daughter knows next to nothing about it. And so they feel like they're left out. They're high and dry, they don't know what to do, who to go to, the kinds of things that they need to know, they find out through involvement in AMI.
Some of the functions of the Alliance include emotional support, education, and advocacy. For example, working with legislators, physicians, and mental health boards in order to make the system work better. Clients, too, have self-help groups that can offer them support and help them combat the stigma that accompanies mental illness. I'd like to thank all of the interviewees for this program. It's heartening to see so many talented, dedicated individuals working so hard to make life better for those with schizophrenia. They've helped us to see where we are and where we need to go in the future.
If we launch a broad new health program now, it will be possible within a decade to reduce the number of patients now under custodial care by up to 50%.
For those folks who are interested in community mental health, I believe, at least at the current time, community mental health has come to the jail.
We don't focus on symptoms and illness. We focus on what people can do, what they want to do.
Law enforcement got into this, if you will, by default.
We really need a truly integrated, seamless system in which all the stakeholders that help our mentally ill population work together with the same goal.
There's more out there. There's people going to school. There's people working in INS or going back in the workforce. So not just me. There's a lot more out there.